Hey, come see us live. We're doing our Rumble Time show September 27th in Los Angeles. We'll be in Tempe, Arizona, and we'll be in Burbank, California. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. So this was Victoria Nuland, who was second in command at the State Department since pretty much 2000. And she engineered the coup in Ukraine. So she pretty much engineered this war. They've been wanting this war for a decade or two at least, and they finally got their war. And so she's being interviewed. There was a peace deal. Immediately after Russia invaded Ukraine, they had a peace deal worked out. And we've reported this already. I'll just summarize it. They had a peace deal, and it was going to... Ukraine would have been much better off had they taken that peace deal that day. In fact, they agreed to it. And the Ukraine negotiators all said, yeah, this is a great deal. This is the best deal we're ever going to get. And they literally opened champagne. They had ended the war. They had a peace deal with Russia, and it was a great deal for Ukraine. And then what happened? What happened was Boris Johnson was sent to Ukraine by NATO and the State Department of the United States to go warn Zelensky that if he signs this peace deal, they're going to kill him. And so, and in fact, the right wing, the Nazis, Azov Battalion, had already guaranteed that they would hang him from a lamppost in town square if he declared peace with Russia. So the peace deal was over. Well, here, Victoria Nuland is going to be questioned about that. And here's what she says.
There was a story first told by former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett that both sides were really close to the end, to the successful end of the negotiations, and then Prime Minister Boris Johnson interfered and stopped.
So the Prime Minister of Israel did it gaffe. He told the truth that they were really clear. They had a peace deal. And then they send this guy. He told the truth, the Prime Minister of Israel. So watch Victoria Nuland's response to this accusation. And she does a thing called duper's delight. So when you're lying, the people who know they're lying, they can't help but smile. So watch her smile all the way through this answer.
Ukrainians prevented Ukrainians from signing the deal. And then Ukrainian Representative Arahami kind of confirmed that yes, he said in an interview that there was some kind of advice from Boris Johnson to stop negotiating and to win this war militarily. Where is the myth? Where is the truth?
Relatively late in the game, the Ukrainians began asking for advice on where this thing was going. And it became clear to us, clear to the Brits, clear to others, that Putin's main condition was buried in an annex to this document that they were working on. Mm-hmm. And it included limits on the precise kinds of weapon systems that Ukraine could have.
Why would she be smiling? This is called duper's delight. She's doing it. And what she's describing is she's trying to say, oh, it made sense that we would tell Ukraine to turn down this peace agreement, which would have stopped the slaughter of 500,000 of their people. It made sense for us to do that because there was a limit on how big their military could be in this peace agreement, how big the Ukraine's military could be, meaning the United States weapons manufacturers couldn't keep selling weapons and weapons of war to Ukraine, so it would cut into their profits. So she's basically admitting that right here, and it's duper's delight. Let's watch the rest of it.
After the deal, such that Ukraine would basically be neutered as a military force. And there were no similar constraints on Russia. Russia wasn't required to pull back. Russia wasn't required to have a buffer zone from the Ukrainian border, wasn't required to have the same constraints on its military facing Ukraine. And so people inside Ukraine and people outside Ukraine started asking questions about whether this was a good deal, and it was at that point that it fell apart.
So here is what our friends over at Going Underground said. They go, Victoria Nuland admits that she, along with other U.S. officials and Boris Johnson, sabotaged the 2022 peace agreement reached between Russia and Ukraine because of the conditions imposed limiting Ukraine's military capabilities. What she doesn't mention is that the deal would have seen Ukraine retain all of its pre-2022 territory, with the status of the Donbass to be decided in direct meetings between Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. The agreement would have been guaranteed by powers such as the United States and the UK. Instead, Nuland and the Biden administration and Boris Johnson thought they could wage a proxy war to the last Ukrainian against Russia to bleed Russia dry. Now Ukraine continues to lose more and more territory every day, faces a demographic crisis after the deaths of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and Russia continues to go from strength to being even stronger. History will see Victoria Nuland as a key architect of the Ukrainian disaster since 2014. And of course, that's not going to be reported that way anywhere in the mainstream news, because again, the mainstream news is controlled by the people who wanted that war so they could profit from it. The people who wanted that proxy war. It was the oil companies, the military industrial complex, the Raytheon, Wall Street. Those are the people who actually control the military, the Pentagon, and the CIA, the NSA, and the Department of... So, Mike, what would you like to say? What else can you say about this?
Well, I just posted to the top of my X timeline. If people go to @MikeBenCyber, and Jimmy, I just tagged you on X if you want to take a look at it. In fact, if you want to pull this image up on screen, it's quite a doozy because you nailed it right on the head about Victoria Nuland. And if we're doing this for oil and gas, you'll see the image at the top of the timeline is Victoria Nuland in December 2013, just 60 days before the U.S. and CIA and Brits jointly overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine. So just 2 months before, if you just go to Mike Ben Cyber on there, you see that? You see that picture? If you just open that and then if you just full screen it so that people can take it in. So this is our U.S. embassy 2 months before we overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014, and the event that Victoria Nuland is speaking at is sponsored, literally the State Department sponsored by ExxonMobil, the largest oil and gas company in the world, and Chevron, the number 2. Now, a little bit more detail on this. Chevron had signed in 2013 a $10 billion gas deal with Naftogaz, the state-run Ukrainian energy company. And they were doing this play that I call the Grand Ukraine Energy Play, which was for Naftogaz to go from Ukraine's state-owned gas giant to being privatized, sold off to Western stakeholders. This is the sort of shock therapy we put Russia through in the 1990s, and that the IMF does whenever we carve up a country who becomes our vassal state. So Chevron had made a $10 billion investment. ExxonMobil had invested billions, and Shell, the London-based oil and gas giant, had also invested $10 billion, all into Naftogaz, all in this 2012-2013 period. And the then president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, refused to agree to the U.S. pitched trade deal, the IMF pitched trade deal that involved privatizing Naftogaz. So as soon as he reneged on that agreement, we activated our rent-a riots. We January 6th them out of office. Now, Victoria Nuland at this speech, that with the image on screen, this was the speech where she bragged about how the U.S. State Department and USAID had flooded Ukrainian civil society, which means when she was referring to the right sector mobs and the civil society institutions who essentially put all these people on payroll so that they're dependent on them. So American taxpayers paid the CIA mafia $5 billion, and she's bragging about that in front of signs for ExxonMobil and Chevron, who happen to be the chief beneficiaries of the regime change. Now, getting back to what happened after that, because the CIA and NATO were not expecting this counter coup when the Donbass broke off and Crimea voted to join the Russian Federation in an independent referendum. When that happened, we lost even before. This is why Nuland would not agree to this deal, because the military invasion of Russia in 2022 is not good enough. The issue is after 2014, the Donbass was still a breakaway state. And guess where all of the gas, all of the shale reserves are in Ukraine? They're in two places. One of them is the Donbass on the east side of the river there. There's the third largest reserves of shale in all of Europe, and it's almost totally unexploited. And then the second largest reserves are right off the coast of Crimea. So when both of those places became not Russian in 2014, but not Kiev, Ukraine, they were the breakaway state of Ukraine, all of the tens of billions of dollars of investments, $30 billion worth of oil and gas company profits went to donuts. Because how can the government of Kiev exploit the shale in the Donbass when it's being militarily occupied by the breakaway state? How is it going to get its oil rigs up and running, its gas rigs up and running off of Crimea when it's under Russian protection? So they needed to, this is why we were funding, the CIA was so involved in the paramilitary reconquest of the Donbass from 2014 to 2022 that Russia came in and tried to stop, because 18,000 Ukrainians in eastern Ukraine were murdered by Kiev's paramilitaries, which were all getting arms from the CIA and training from British intelligence. So it's not good enough simply to reset the lines back. If the $14 trillion worth of natural resources and the billions of dollars worth of oil and gas deals, they sponsored them. Remember, while this was happening, Trump got into office in January 2017. Do you remember who he made his first Secretary of State?
Yeah, it was the head of Exxon.
Yeah, it was Rex Tillerson, the
That's
chairman
right.
of ExxonMobil. So
they took out the middle. There's no middleman anymore. We just put him right in charge of the State Department.
Right, but it's exactly what we were saying is, what is, the State Department is, it's like the State Department, CIA, DOD, they are the executioners. It looks like it's the government doing this because they're the ones they're the last face you see before everything goes dark. But the analogy that I give is it's sort of like the Sopranos, the Furio, the thug who comes in and debt collects for the Soprano family. A lot of people see this government abuse and they think the government's out of control. Now it is, but the fact is it's not Victoria Nuland running this. She's a part of the Kagan family and that whole neocon war industry, energy industry, Chamber of Commerce mafia. And so that's the sort of Tony Soprano of the mob here. Just because Furio is the guy who shows up to your house and beats the crap out of you and your family doesn't mean that he's the one running it. So I would say the same thing about Victoria Nuland.
So do you think that what Bobby Kennedy is saying is that Trump got duped in his first term, that he got that the swamp kind of smothered him, and he didn't know, he had to hire 60,000 people and for the federal government, and he didn't really know what he was doing because he was a political novice. And so, but he learned from that, so he won't make those mistakes in this second term, especially with Bobby Kennedy advising him. Bobby Kennedy is outspoken against the Ukraine war and against the war with Russia and China, except for the war in the Middle East. Bobby's all on board. What do you make of that? Do you think that because that's the only hope there is in this country right now, because Kamala Harris is just like having Victoria Nuland be the president of the United States. I mean, it's over. They will ramp up the war in Ukraine. They will ramp up war with Russia. They will ramp up, and we're messing with nuclear powers now, and they will do a war with Iran at the behest of Israel. They will do every war possible, including Venezuela, and no matter what it is, they won't stop. So what do you make of that when Bobby Kennedy gave his big speech, or he was on a podcast, and he talked about how that Trump got duped and he was overwhelmed his first term, but he's learned, and this next term that he won't let that happen. Do you think that? I mean, I think Bobby's sincere, but do you think Trump is? And what do you make of that?
I think there's some truth in that, and I saw it myself while I was in the White House. But it's not just Bobby Kennedy saying that. It's also James Comey, the FBI director, who, if you recall, after he was fired as the FBI director, began this sort of publicity tour about how bad Trump was. And in one of the panel discussions he was on a couple of years after he was fired, he said, he was asked about how they set up, Mike Flynn and had the, if you remember, there were the handwritten notes from the FBI agents. Are we going there to get him fired or to get him to perjure himself? Like literally, they're like, is the purpose of this cloak and dagger thing we shouldn't be doing, or this cloak and dagger thing it's illegal for us to do? But Comey was asked about that, and what he said was, well, we wouldn't have done that to Hillary Clinton, in part because we wouldn't have been able to, but the Trump administration was so green in January 2017. They were such novices that we figured, they'd fall right into our trap. And I think that is a very accurate assessment of the first 3 years of the Trump administration. It really took until about early 2020 for a few things to happen, not just the institutional knowledge of Trump sort of starting to get a peripheral vision of what he's up against. I still wouldn't say it's a clear line of sight, but I think his peripheral vision on these things has improved. But also, Trump had to do favors for a significant wing of the Republican Party. Remember, because he didn't just beat the Clinton dynasty when he got in 2016. He also beat the Bushes, and at the time, every member of Congress was every career civil service official at the State Department or CIA or DOD, every foreign affairs every foreign service member. They were all Bushes, or they were a part of the Bush, Romney, McCain axis. There was no like Pat Buchanan populist right, seats in government, so he had to win them over, having coming into it not just against the Democrats but also against his own party. And so I think it took him several years to actually put enough favors in the favor bank. He gave the Pentagon more funding than it had ever asked for. He did things like bomb Syria, with the, what was probably a token show, but, he did all these sort of maneuverings. Now, part of that, I think, was because he needed the Republican support to stave off Russiagate, but when Russiagate ended in July 2019, he began to make quite serious changes, including he changed his presidential personnel office. He changed the practice of hiring and firing political appointees. He basically started unshackling himself from donors. If you recall, he had John Bolton as a national security advisor for about 3 months, and then fired him and said, if I'd kept going with John Bolton, we'd be in World War VI by now. But so he did. It's sort of like, if you remember the pussy tape in the 2016 election.
Yes.
And when it happened, there was like,
grab him by the pussy.
3/4 of the country was like, it's over. But then he took to Twitter. He was like, well, I'm unshackled now. I'm just going to do. And so, there was really the beginning of that. And that's why the Democrats are so obsessed with this Project 2025 thing, even though it's, what is it? It's like a side project of heritage by people not even on Trump's campaign, but they've made this whole Project 20. Well, it's because Project 2025 articulates this Schedule F technique for the mass firing, mass layoffs of these blob bureaucrats, which is the main institutional control to stop the agenda to reform the government at DOD, at state, at CIA, at HHS. So Trump has expressed that he wants to do that, and that's one of the reasons they're tying him to Project 2025. But he may need to back off that just to not get assassinated.
All right, Mike, I hate to end our interview, but I have other guests waiting, and we're already over time. And I really appreciate you coming on. Mike, how come you're allowed to tell these truths? Why haven't they come for your Twitter account? Why haven't they thrown you in jail?
Well, I don't have a YouTube. I don't have a Facebook. I only started this social media account after Elon acquired X, and there was, the promise of freedom on there. So I sort of rolled the dice by, because I saw what happened to people who spent their life's work building up a voice, and then, you lose it all because, the YouTube answers to what the government says, or their own censors take you out. But, for me, I don't know. I mean, I get asked that question a lot, which is like, how has no one killed you? And then how have you not killed yourself? Because some of this stuff is somewhat depressing. But, the fact is I think Julian Assange is a complete and total hero. I think Snowden is a hero. Everything I do is open source. Everything I do is, when I talk about the National Endowment for Democracy, I'm using their own documents. I'm not, I don't meet with sources. I don't get, special information. I'm trying, basically trying to explain this almost like, an internet university professor, just trying to help people sense make what these institutions say about themselves. But at the same time, I'm well aware that, when you fly too close to the sun, you get burned. And there are things that, frankly, I think need to be published that I've been too afraid to publish because of that exact concern that you expressed. But, hopefully we can build up a free speech coalition, as I think has started to come together through Elon, I think being good, through Rumble being secure, through allies in Congress taking this issue seriously, finally, through lawyers, moving into the space. I'm putting my hope in the fact that this is something bigger than my own life. And if something happens to me, then if I'm a dead man walking, I'm going to walk as far as I can. So hopefully that never happens, but we'll see.
Okay. Mike Benz, everybody check out his Twitter account. I really appreciate you coming on today, and I hope we could get you back on. There's lots more stuff I'd like to talk to you about.
Thanks, Jimmy. And I'm a big fan of your leadership and your work and your voice, so appreciate your time today.
I appreciate that. Hey, come see us live. We're doing our Rumble Time show September 27th in Los Angeles. We'll be in Tempe, Arizona, and we'll be in Burbank, California. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.